Don't embarrass yourself, big sister, my sister said softly, her lips close to my ear. Men don't belong to women like you. The room was full of people, but somehow the silence was louder than the laughter. My husband stood there, eyes lowered, not defending me, not denying her hand on his arm. Someone coughed. Someone else chuckled. And I felt it then, that slow, burning understanding that whatever I thought my life was, it had already shifted without my permission. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because something inside me went very still. My name is Ebony. I grew up in Abaddon, in a compound where everyone knew everyone's business before the sun finished rising. My mother used to say a woman's dignity is like palm oil. Once it spills, the ground remembers forever. So I learned early how to move carefully, how to speak gently, how to make myself smaller so others could feel taller. My sister Kemi never learned that lesson. Or maybe she did, and decided it wasn't for her. Kemi was 2 years younger than me, lighter-skinned, sharper-tongued, with a laugh that turned heads at weddings and funerals alike. Where I was quiet, she was magnetic. Where I listened, she interrupted. People said she was bold. My mother said she would either marry very well or destroy a home. We all laughed when she said it. Even me. When I married Kunnel, people said I was lucky. He was calm, respectful, educated. Not flashy, not loud. He didn't compete with other men in beer parlors or talk big about money. He asked questions. He observed. When he spoke, people leaned in. We met at a cooperative meeting for small traders near Dugby Market. I sold fabrics then, Ankara, lace, simple cotton for everyday women. He came to help his uncle register a logistics business. He noticed the way I counted money twice, the way I listened more than I spoke. He said he liked women who didn't rush the world. Our marriage wasn't dramatic. It was steady. We rented a modest flat in Makola. We ate EBA at night and shared one plate of okra soup. On Sundays, we visited his auntie and my mother, switching weeks so no one felt neglected. When money was tight, he never raised his voice. When business was good, he didn't boast. If you asked me then, I would have said I was content. Kemi moved in with us after her tailoring apprenticeship ended. She said Abaddon was too small for her dreams, but Lagos was too expensive. She promised it would be temporary. Kunnel agreed before I could finish thinking. He always believed helping family was a duty, not a choice. At first, everything was normal. Kemi woke early, tied her wrapper loosely, complained about the heat. She teased Kunnel playfully, calling him brother-in-law, with an exaggerated bow. I noticed things, but I told myself I was imagining them. The way she lingered in the doorway when he dressed for work. The way she laughed a second too long at his jokes. I trusted my sister. I trusted my husband. And most of all, I trusted silence. The shift came quietly. It always does. Kunnel started coming home later. Not excessively late, just late enough to have an explanation ready. Traffic. A meeting. Helping a client. Kemi started dressing differently around the house. Lip gloss. Perfume. Even on days she claimed she wasn't going anywhere. One evening, as I washed plates, I heard her voice in the living room. Low. Intimate. You're different from other men, she said. There was a pause. Too long. I didn't rush out. I didn't spy. I dried my hands slowly and walked in like nothing was happening. They both looked up. Kunnel smiled. Kemi didn't. From that day, the disrespect stopped hiding. She corrected me in front of him, questioned my decisions, made jokes about my old-fashioned ways. When I asked Kunnel privately if something was wrong, he said I was tired. That business stress was making me sensitive. I believed him. Or maybe I chose to. The humiliation reached its peak at my cousin's engagement party. Music was loud, drinks were flowing, and relatives I hadn't seen in years were suddenly experts on my marriage. Kemi arrived late, wearing a dress that wasn't meant for subtle entrances. Kunnel stood up when she entered. People noticed. I noticed. They danced together. Not the innocent kind. The kind that invites eyes. That was when she leaned into me and whispered the words that opened the story. After that night, Nothing was said aloud, but everything was decided. Connell stopped pretending.
He stopped eating my food sometimes. Stopped asking about my day.
Kemi started sleeping out. When I asked where she went, she smiled and said, "A woman doesn't report to another woman." My mother called me one afternoon. She had heard things. She always did. "Ebony," she said carefully, "marriage is not a competition. But don't close your eyes when someone is walking over your mat with dirty feet." I thanked her and said everything was fine. It wasn't pride that kept me quiet. It was observation. I began to watch. I noticed Connell's phone habits. The way he guarded it, then deliberately left it face up sometimes, as if daring me. I noticed Kemi's confidence growing sharper, less cautious. People who feel protected make mistakes. People who think they've already won stop looking behind them. And Connell changed in smaller ways. His Yoruba became more formal when he spoke to certain callers. He corrected people gently when they assumed things about his background. Once, when a neighbor joked that Connell was lucky to have married into our humble family, Connell smiled in a way I had never seen before. That smile stayed with me. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found a document folded inside a book he rarely touched. It wasn't hidden carefully.
It didn't need to be.
It had a different name on it. Not Connell Adeyemi.
I didn't panic.
I didn't confront him. I folded it back exactly the way I found it. My hands didn't shake. My heart slowed instead. That night, I served dinner like always. EBA. Egusi soup. He ate quietly. Kemi didn't come home. When Connell went to sleep, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the compound settling into night. Radios lowering. Doors locking. Somewhere, a generator humming. For the first time since my marriage began, I understood something clearly. I was not being replaced. I was being tested. And the people who thought I was losing had no idea what game they were playing. I turned on my side and closed my eyes, already certain that whatever Connell was hiding, whatever identity he thought was safely buried, would eventually come into the light. Not because I would drag it out, but because people who underestimate quiet women always expose themselves. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed moved with an unusual calm, the kind that settles before a heavy rain. I did not change my tone. I did not accuse. I did not become kinder or colder. I simply continued being myself, which seemed to confuse them more than anger ever could. Connell watched me sometimes, as if expecting a question that never came. Kemi, on the other hand, became bolder. She started calling him by his first name instead of brother-in-law, even in front of me. When neighbors were around, she lowered her voice and touched his arm as if by accident. When we were alone, she didn't bother hiding her smile. One morning, while I was plaiting my hair in the mirror, she leaned against the doorframe and said, "Some women think marriage is ownership. It's not. It's opportunity." I met her eyes in the mirror and said nothing. Silence makes people uncomfortable when they expect resistance. She laughed and walked away. I began to notice other things. Connell's phone calls often happened outside, late at night, spoken in careful English, not the casual mix of Yoruba and Pidgin he used with friends. Sometimes he drove to places he said were meetings, but returned with no dust on his shoes, no exhaustion on his face. He smelled like air-conditioned rooms and restraint. I started asking questions, not of him, but of the world around him. At Dugby Market, I spoke to a woman whose brother worked in logistics. I asked casually if she knew Connell's uncle. She frowned and said she had never heard of him. At first, I thought nothing of it. Ibadan was big. But then another trader said the same thing. And another. I went to his Annie's house one Sunday when he said he was busy. She looked surprised to see me alone. "Connell didn't tell you?" she asked. "Tell me what?" I said gently. She hesitated, then waved it away. It's nothing. You know men." But her eyes avoided mine. That night, Connell came home earlier than usual. He watched me eat, watched me wash my hands. Finally, he said, "You've been quiet lately." "I've always been quiet," I replied. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Quiet can mean many things. So can noise, I said, and that was the end of it. The distance between us was no longer emotional. It was strategic. Kemi announced one evening that she had been offered a job in a boutique owned by a family friend. She said it while Connell was present, watching his reaction more than mine. That's good, I said. You've always wanted independence. She studied my face, searching for bitterness, jealousy, anything. Finding nothing seemed to irritate her. The boutique was in a part of town she had never mentioned before. Upscale. Quiet. The kind of place where people paid attention to names. A week later, she stopped coming home altogether. People began to talk because people always do. Not loudly, not openly. Just enough to let you know they were watching. Ebony is too calm. One woman whispered at the water tap. If it were me, I would have scattered that house. Another said, some women don't know when they're being pushed out. I carried my bucket home and said nothing. Then one afternoon, Connell came home with an unfamiliar confidence. He sat on the edge of the bed and said, we need to talk. I nodded. Okay. He looked disappointed by my lack of reaction. There are opportunities coming, he continued. Big ones. But they require flexibility. What kind of flexibility? I asked. He cleared his throat. Change. Movement. Understanding. I waited. Kemi understands, he said finally. There it was, placed carefully between us like a test. I see, I said. He leaned forward. You're a good woman, Ebony, but you're comfortable with small things. Some people want more. And you? I asked. What do you want? He hesitated, then said, peace. I almost smiled. That night, he did not sleep at home. I spent the hours before dawn thinking, not about betrayal, but about timing. The document I had found stayed clear in my mind. The name, the format, the kind of paper it was printed on. I decided it was time to confirm what I already suspected. I went to a cyber cafe the next day, the kind that smelled like dust and hot electronics. I paid for an hour and searched quietly. The name on the document led me down paths that did not end in Abaddon. It ended in Abuja, in companies that did not advertise, in boards that did not list all their members publicly. Connell was not Connell. He was using a borrowed name, a softened life. And he was very careful about who knew. I logged out and left without shaking. The following week, Connell returned home with an announcement. We were invited to a small gathering, a celebration. He said it was important. He said people who mattered would be there. Kemi will be there, he added, watching my face. I nodded. What should I wear? That surprised him. He gave me the address. A private residence, not a hall. Somewhere in Jericho. On the day of the gathering, I dressed simply. Not poor, not extravagant. I braided my hair neatly and wore earrings my mother had given me on my wedding day. I looked like exactly what I was supposed to look like. Connell picked me up in a car I had never seen before. You're quiet again, he said. I'm listening, I replied. When we arrived, I understood immediately. The guests were not like our usual circle. They spoke carefully. They watched each other. Power sat on their shoulders like an invisible cloth. Kemi was there, radiant, confident, her hand resting possessively on Connell's arm. This is my sister, she said to someone as we approached, not bothering to introduce me by name. The person nodded politely and turned away. Connell cleared his throat. Everyone, he said, thank you for coming. He began to speak about growth, about vision, about partnerships. He spoke well. Too well for someone pretending to be small. As he talked, I noticed subtle shifts. Certain men nodded at him with recognition. One woman raised an eyebrow when he mentioned his background. Kemi stood tall, as if she had already stepped into a new life. When Connell finished, someone asked a question. A simple one. And your family, the man said. They must be proud. Connell smiled. Yes. My wife has been very supportive. All eyes turned to me. I met them calmly. Yes, I said. Support is important when someone carries more than one name. The air changed. Connell's smile froze. Kemi's fingers tightened on his arm. What do you mean? Someone asked lightly, but not casually. I looked at Connell, then back at the group. Only that my husband has always been a man of many layers. It takes strength to live between identities. Silence followed, thick and curious. Connell laughed too quickly. My wife likes metaphors, he said. I smiled. I like accuracy. A woman near the window studied me with new interest. What identity is that? She asked. I turned to Connell. Should I explain, or would you prefer to?
His eyes warned me. Pleaded. Promised.
I lifted my hand gently. Don't worry.
Not now.
Relief washed over his face, mixed with fear. The gathering continued, but something had shifted. Conversations included me now. Questions came my way. People asked about my work, my family, my opinions. Kemi faded into the background unnoticed. When we left, Connell was silent. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. You embarrass me, he said finally. I protected you, I replied. From yourself. He said nothing. At home, he did not sleep. I lay awake, listening to his restlessness, knowing that the balance had tipped. He knew I knew, and Kemi, for the first time, was unsure of her position. The next morning she called me. Why are you doing this? She asked sharply. Doing what? I replied.
Pretending, she said.
You know what's happening. Everyone does. I paused. Pretending is when you act without knowing the truth. I'm not pretending.
She scoffed.
You think knowing a secret gives you power? No, I said softly. Timing does. She hung up. From that day, Connell watched his steps carefully. Kemi grew impatient. She wanted the future she had imagined, and she wanted it fast. People who rush toward power often forget to check who is holding the door. And I was still standing quietly, exactly where I had always been. Kemi stopped pretending to be polite after that. Politeness is a luxury for people who feel secure, and she no longer did. She started calling the house less, then more, then showing up unannounced, pacing like someone measuring a room she wanted to own. Connell, meanwhile, became careful in ways that revealed too much. He corrected himself mid-sentence.
He watched who was around before speaking.
The confidence he had worn so easily before now sat stiff on him, like borrowed clothes. One evening, while we were eating in silence, he said, People talk.
People always talk, I replied.
This is different, he said. They ask questions. Questions are not dangerous, I said calmly. Answers are. He looked at me, then really looked, as if seeing me for the first time since we married. You've changed. No, I said. You've stopped seeing me the way you needed to. That night, he slept facing the wall. The next week brought news that traveled faster than truth ever does. Someone said Connell was being considered for a major appointment. Someone else said he already had it. Names were mentioned. Abuja again. The kind of conversations that happen in low voices but carry far. Kemi began to move as if the decision had already been made. She spoke of future plans openly now. Of relocating. Of becoming official. She didn't say with whom, but she didn't need to. One afternoon, she cornered me in the kitchen. You can't stop what's coming, she said. You should accept it with grace. I stirred the pot slowly. Grace is easier when people aren't lying to you. She laughed. Men lie. That's normal. Some lies cost more than others, I said. She leaned closer. What do you think you know, Ebony? I turned and faced her. Enough. Her smile faltered. Just for a moment. The invitation came 2 days later. A formal one. Thick paper. Official language. A public event to announce leadership changes in a private consortium.
Connell's name was on it.
The borrowed one. He brought it to me himself. I want you there, he said. I know, I replied. You'll support me, he added, more like a question than a statement. I've always supported the truth, I said. It depends on whether it shows up. He didn't sleep that night either. The day of the event arrived heavy with heat. Abuja heat, not the playful kind, but the type that presses against your chest and reminds you who controls the air. The venue was polished, guarded, carefully distant from ordinary life. Inside, Everything smelled like money and restraint. I watched Cunnel greet people who knew him under a name I had only recently learned. Some addressed him with respect that bordered on fear. Others with familiarity that suggested history. No one treated him like the modest man from Makola. Kemi arrived late, dressed like she had already stepped into a different life. She ignored me completely. The program began. Speeches layered over speeches. Words like integrity, vision, legacy repeated until they almost lost meaning. Then Cunnel was called forward. He walked confidently, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He spoke about beginnings, about humility, about how he had learned from ordinary people. When he mentioned his wife, he paused. "I owe much," he said, "to the woman who stood beside me when I was nobody." The room applauded. Kemi's face tightened. The moderator smiled. "It's inspiring to see a man who remembers his roots," he said. "Though some roots, I hear, are more complex than they appear." A few people laughed politely. I felt Cunnel's gaze flick toward me. Then the moderator continued. "Before we conclude, there's a procedural matter. A verification, really. Formality." My heartbeat remained steady. A woman in a tailored suit stepped forward. She introduced herself briefly. Her voice carried authority without effort. "There has been a request," she said, "to clarify the identity records associated with Mr. Adeyemi." The room shifted. Cunnel's smile strained. "I'm sure this can be handled privately." The woman nodded. "It can, but transparency is part of leadership." She turned to the screen behind them. A document appeared. Then another. Names.
Dates.
Connections. Not accusations.
Facts.
The name Cunnel Adeyemi dissolved quietly into another. One that carried weight. One that carried responsibility.
Murmurs spread.
Not shock, recognition. Kemi looked around, confused now. This wasn't the triumph she had rehearsed. The woman continued. "This identity was not hidden for malicious reasons," she said. "But it was hidden." Cunnel opened his mouth, then closed it. The moderator cleared his throat. "Is your wife aware of this?" he asked. All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. "Yes," I said. "I've always known who my husband is." That was not entirely true, but it was close enough to the truth to stand. "And you accept this?" someone asked. "I accept people as they show themselves," I replied. Eventually, Kemi stepped forward suddenly. "This is nonsense," she said. He told me. She stopped. Realized too late that no one had asked her anything. Silence wrapped around her words and tightened. The moderator raised a hand gently.
"Thank you," he said.
"We have what we need." The rest happened without noise. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a quiet recalibration of power. Appointments postponed. Conversations deferred. Cunnel stepped down from the stage, no longer the center of attention. Kemi stood alone, her certainty collapsing inward. When we left the venue, no one spoke. Outside, the sun was setting, washing the city in tired gold. Cunnel stopped and faced me. His voice was low. "Why didn't you stop it?" I looked at him. "I did. I stopped it from becoming something worse." He swallowed. "You could have destroyed me." "I could have," I agreed. "But that wasn't the lesson." Kemi laughed bitterly behind us. "You planned this," she said. I turned to her.
"No."
I waited. She stared at me, searching for anger, cruelty, triumph. Finding none seemed to break her more than anything else. That night, Cunnel did not come home. I returned to Abaddon alone. The compound was quiet when I arrived. My mother looked at me and said nothing.
She didn't need to.
I slept deeply for the first time in months. By morning, messages had started arriving. From people who suddenly wanted my opinion, my presence, my silence. I replied to none of them. Because the truth was simple. What had been revealed was not my husband's identity. It was everyone else's. And I was finally free enough to decide what to do with that knowledge. I stayed in Abaddon longer than I planned. Not because I was hiding, but because I needed to feel the ground that made me before deciding where to stand next. The compound breathed the way it always had. Women swept at dawn. Children argued over nothing. Life did not pause for betrayal or revelation. That steadiness reminded me who I was before anyone else tried to define me. Connell did not call for 3 days. When he finally did, his voice sounded smaller, as if stripped of the rooms that once echoed his confidence. "I made mistakes," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I never meant to humiliate you." "I know," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. There was a pause. "What happens now?" That question, so simple, so heavy, hung between us. "What happens now," I said slowly, "is that you decide who you are willing to be when no one is impressed." He exhaled. "And you?" "I've already decided," I said. We did not argue. We did not reconcile. We acknowledged something had ended without announcing what would replace it. Kemi, on the other hand, did not disappear quietly. She arrived in Abaddon a week later, unannounced, her confidence replaced by agitation. She came to my mother's house, knowing it was the one place I wouldn't cause a scene. "You ruined everything," she said the moment we were alone. I poured water into 2 cups and handed her one.
She didn't take it.
"I didn't do anything," I said. "You walked into rooms you didn't understand." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "You think you're wise now?" "No," I said. "I think I'm done competing." Her voice dropped. "He loved me." I looked at her then. Really looked. Not as my sister. Not as my rival. Just as a woman who had confused attention for protection. "He trusted you with a version of himself," I said. "That's not love. That's convenience." She shook her head. "You're saying this to hurt me." "I'm saying it because no one ever told you the truth gently," I replied. She sat down heavily. For the first time, she looked tired. "They all disappeared," she said quietly. "The calls. The plans. Even him." I nodded. Power has a way of revealing who is only visiting. She wiped her face quickly, as if embarrassed by the tears. "What did you gain from this?"
I thought about that.
"I gained silence," I said. "And choice." She didn't stay long after that. When she left, she didn't look back. Connell returned to Abaddon weeks later. Not to reclaim anything but to talk. We met at a small place near the road. Nothing special. No audience. "I'm stepping back," he said. "From everything." "That's wise," I said. "I underestimated you," he added. "Yes," I agreed again. He smiled faintly. "You never tried to prove anything." "I didn't need to," I said. "People prove themselves eventually." He looked at me carefully. "If I had told you the truth from the beginning," I held up my hand gently. "We can't build new honesty on old hypotheticals." He nodded. "Then what do you want?" The question felt different this time. Not demanding. Not defensive. "I want a life where I'm not constantly adjusting myself to make others comfortable," I said. "Whether that includes you or not depends on whether you can live with that." He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know if I can," he said finally. "That's an answer," I replied. We parted without bitterness. In the months that followed, my life grew quieter and fuller at the same time. I expanded my fabric business slowly, deliberately. I partnered with women who understood patience. I traveled between Abaddon and Abeokuta, not chasing growth, but allowing it. People still talked. They always would. Some said I was foolish for not holding on to my husband when his name carried weight. Others said I was dangerous because I smiled through disgrace. I let them talk. Kemi moved to another city. We spoke occasionally, cautiously. Not close, not hostile. Just aware. Some bonds break loudly. Others loosen and never quite tighten again. As for Connell, he remained a presence at a distance. Respectful. Careful. Changed in ways I did not rush to evaluate. One evening, my mother watched me fold fabrics and said, "You know, strength doesn't always announce itself." I smiled. "I know." She nodded. "That's why people mistake quiet women for weak ones." I finished folding and looked out into the compound, where life continued without waiting for permission. There was no celebration for what had happened. No final confrontation. No victory speech. Just a woman who had been underestimated, who waited, who chose restraint over spectacle. And in doing so, allowed others to reveal themselves fully. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives like clarity. And when it does, the loudest people are rarely the ones left standing.